The recording should have started, Chair.
Yes, it has. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to Homes and Safe Communities on Wednesday, the 14th of June. Before we start, I do have some housekeeping to go through. May I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen on screen or use the raise hand function? If a participant raises their hand via the function and is not subsequently invited to speak by the chair, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. When invited to address by the chair, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of the chair and/or Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and/or to grab the attention of the chair or Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has any difficulty hearing or being heard or seen when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chair or Democratic officer know. Thank you. As I said, well, welcome. Agenda item number 1 is apologies for absence. I know we do have the 3 from Councillor Ball, Councillor Hanks and David Dutch. Do we have any further apologies? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 2 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of May 2023. Is everybody happy with those minutes?
Yes, Chair.
Happy, Chair.
Okay, move and note.
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item 3 is to receive declarations of interest. Do we have any? All right then. So we will go on to agenda item 4, a reference from Cabinet, the Vale of Glamorgan Council Annual Performance Calendar 2023 to 24. I shall bring Tom in now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair, and good evening, committee. Good to see everybody this evening. Hope you're all well. Thank you for having me. This is a reference from Cabinet. It's coming to your Scrutiny Committee this evening. It's also going to all the other Scrutiny Committees, and it was also considered by Governance and Audit Committee earlier on this week. And the annual performance calendar report, this is the second time we've brought this report to committees. Initially, I thought it was a good idea to do last year with a large influx of new elected members to demonstrate how all the various component parts of the performance arrangements fit together. But committee will also note that a series of changes were introduced by the Local Government and Elections Act in relation to corporate performance of local authorities in 2021. So we thought it was a good idea to keep the annual performance calendar report coming to committees to give oversight and overview for these arrangements. The report provides an update on 3 aspects of work associated with corporate performance: the self-assessment process, which the Local Government and Elections Act introduced as a new component of performance arrangements, also an update in terms of the panel peer assessment process, and then finally a bit of an update in terms of the overall performance calendar itself. So members will know that last year was the first time that under the new legislation we published our self-assessment report, and the purpose of the self-assessment report is to look at our potential to improve and also how we use our people, assets, our finance and our performance information to improve and support the delivery of our wellbeing objectives. So the report that's before you this evening, colleagues, provides you with some reflections that have been undertaken both by council officers but also by committee members, by Cabinet, the Welsh Government and the WLGA in terms of the first year of that new arrangement operating. It also suggests some changes that we're going to be introducing as part of this year's process. So it talks about it building in some additional rigour, for example, further consideration of the risks that are impacting on our activities, some standard preparation for the peer challenge sessions, which as directors we challenge one another's directorate level self-assessments before they're aggregated up. So we're looking to do some further work there, and also in response to feedback, looking to simplify the way that the report is produced and published as well in the autumn. So in terms of where we're at in producing that self-assessment report, we're currently working with our directorate teams to produce the 5 directorate self-assessments. Those will be put together this month for challenge sessions to run throughout July. Yourself as Scrutiny Chair, Councillor Collins will be involved in some of those alongside Cabinet members and, as I said, the directors and the Chief Executive. We'll then pull together a composite of the Council's draft self-assessment report, and that will be consulted on over the summer and into September. And there'll be an initial draft then coming through the committees in October and November before full Council. Members will note that Governance and Audit Committee have got some specific duties in relation to self-assessment. So they see the report on a number of occasions, and they have the ability to challenge and feedback as part of the development process. So that's the self-assessment update. In terms of the panel peer assessment, members will recall that the Act introduced this as a new component of performance arrangements. So self-assessment has to happen on an annual basis and is done internally with an element of external consultation. But once in every 5-year electoral cycle, the council is required to commission an external peer challenge or peer performance assessment, and that's undertaken independently of the organisation. We are involved in the scope of what the panel look at, but the panel's activities are independent to the council. It needs to be done and a response report from the council published within 6 months of the next local government election. The report that we took to Cabinet made a recommendation in terms of the timing of when that panel assessment process should be undertaken. It should be noted that it's a political decision as to when that panel assessment is done, but from an officer perspective, we are going to be producing a new corporate plan, so 5-year strategy for the organisation, and that needs to be in place from April 2025. So the suggestion or recommendation to Cabinet that was accepted is that panel assessment would be useful as part of that development process. So therefore, the timing of early 2024 would make sense, so that it could be undertaken, responded to, and then used as part of the evidence base in terms of how we take our work forward in that new 5-year strategy. So the report makes that recommendation. And then finally, in terms of the third area of the report, that's around the annual performance calendar itself. And that's set out for elected members in full in Appendix A to the report. That shows how all the various aspects of corporate performance fit together. So it talks members through when the quarterly performance reports are produced, reported and scrutinised. It also talks then about the development and reporting of the self-assessment, which then feeds the development of the next year's annual delivery plan, which in turn is translated into service plans and target setting early in the calendar year. So the idea is that this gives you as members an overview of how the various components fit together. One of the things in response to scrutiny members' requests prior to the election was to have greater involvement in the development and production of how these reports look, and to do that in a forum outside of the Scrutiny Committee as well as inside the Scrutiny Committee. So members will be aware that we ran a series of informal, if you like, sessions with all elected members being invited, throughout the year last year, and we looked at issues such as the approach and reporting of the self-assessment, how it would be useful to present for scrutiny the service plans and target setting, as well as the production and presentation of the quarterly performance reports. And from my perspective, they were really, really useful sessions in order to be able to test different ideas, to hear different perspectives, and for elected members to be able to contribute to debate and discussion collectively on those, as well as the discussion and debate that happens in the Scrutiny Committee. So we are proposing that we'll run those sessions again across this calendar year as well, Chair, so that the members have that opportunity to further influence the way that this aspect of the organisation's work is produced for you. So that's a really quick kind of overview of the various aspects of the report. Obviously, very happy to take any comments and questions this evening that members may have.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Councillor Morgan.
Just really to thank Tom for the presentation and the clarity he always brings to these matters. And I look forward to joining him in workshops or whatever we may be doing later in the year. But thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Lloyd-Selby.
Yeah, just to echo the comments that have already been made. Thank you, Tom, for providing us with such a comprehensive, clear report and for summarising it tonight. Particularly pleased to see the focus on capturing engagement with members of the public and also recognising at a directorate level the risks that the departments are facing. We know the impact of cost of living crisis has not yet fully been realised, and obviously that brings pressure on the work that the council's doing. So capturing those risks and being transparent and open about the potential impact of those, I think, is really important. So thank you. Just one question. So I note in the report it says a member workshop will be undertaken in July. And my question was just, is that a workshop that's specifically for colleagues on the Governance and Audit Committee, or will that be an open workshop for all members?
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd-Selby. I'm just double checking the July one, and no, that will be for all elected members, and that the focus of that one is around the annual self-assessment report and how that will be produced. We've got some initial thoughts about how we can simplify the presentation of that based on the really good feedback through the scrutiny committees that we had last autumn. So we just want to play back and test some of our ideas, and also obviously hear any that elected members will have. So it'll be an open invitation to all elected members.
Thank you. I look forward to receiving it.
Well, Councillor Lloyd-Selby has just asked the question I was going to ask about the members group thing, but I'm going to bring Councillor Perks in now.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of make a point, really, and I think the self-assessment peer assessments with the directors are really helpful, because even though they have all the RAG systems and the corporate plan and things like that, it's a good opportunity for them to sit down and talk through the year and what they've achieved, if there's any difficulties and things like that, but also to be supported there by sort of the chair. So Millie would be there, for this scrutiny committee, but also the chief officer and the other people who are a part of that, as well as having a director from another section as well. I think I found those last year quite interesting to be a part of, and I think that's a really good chance for the directors to actually sit down and review everything that they've done, but also to have the support of the other officers within the council and the councillors as well, some of the chairs.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, you're muted.
There you go. Just briefly on the workshop, Tom, and that is obviously because of July and a holiday period, is there likely to be a mop-up session, because it's important, if it is open to all members, that members have the opportunity to engage, so that they are I suppose equipped then to sort of move forward and obviously learn lessons, and it'll put them in a stronger position of being able to sort of understand the journey that the officers are taking in the next sort of year. That would be useful if we could do some sort of mop-up, so it would perhaps as well diminish any claims that the councillors weren't involved or aware of that process.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's a really good suggestion. And what I'll do is I'll liaise with my colleagues in Democratic Services now over the next couple of days to try and identify a date. And we'll obviously try and avoid the latter part of July if we can, but working around your other commitments, because I'm aware that that a number of members are on multiple committees, so that tends to fill up your evenings in the first couple of weeks of each month. But what we can certainly look to do after the recess is perhaps put a pre-briefing into the diary. It may be slightly too late to directly influence the structure of the report, because we need to get that tied down to consult on. But sometimes I know when we've done those briefings ahead of, for example, the annual delivery plan and also the service plans, an opportunity to walk through the architecture and content can sometimes help members, so that then at the meeting you're not having to listen to officers describe how it's put together and what's in there. You're able to then get into the detail of scrutiny. So I can certainly make sure that there's a pre-briefing opportunity put in for elected members after the recess.
Just on that point, Tom, there are many councillors that also have full-time jobs. So is it likely to just be an evening, or is there going to be afternoon sessions and evening sessions, or what?
I'd be really open to the views of elected members, and I know this is always a tricky one because different people have obviously got different commitments. In the past, we've tended to run these at 5 o'clock,
Okay.
so that they've been almost tea time sessions. Sometimes that can be easy for people. I do know and appreciate that sometimes that can offer a challenge as well. So any feedback that you've got as a committee, I'm very happy to take on board. If we went with those sort of 5 o'clock sessions as a kind of bridge before the end of the working day, but equally not into the evening, I'm obviously more than happy and always available to discuss with elected members separately. I can always make time to do that at a time that's convenient with them.
Okay, I have to admit, personally, I prefer 6 over 5, but 5 isn't impossible. I can make arrangements to work from home that day and finish at 4 o'clock or 4:30. But if it's a day when I'm in the office, it's difficult, to get back for 5 o'clock. So I try, for example, with the scrutiny committee last night, that started at 5, and I try to arrange to work from home on those days, but it's not always possible. But as I say, I try my best, and I'm sure other people have the same kind of issues, and also try their best to make everything they can. So just yeah, it's something to think about. Okay, thank you. Any other queries or comments? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, I'm going to call an end to that. Are we happy to move a note with the suggestions made?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Chair.
Just to double check, Chair, are there any comments to go back to Cabinet, or are we just happy for it to be noted by the committee?
Just happy for it to be noted, and any comments regarding the member session, just to be noted as well. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, committee.
Thank you. Okay, so agenda item 5. This is, I have to admit, I thought we'd spend longer on that last item, but agenda item 5 is the report of the Director of Environment and Housing, Shared Regulatory Services Business Plan. Okay, I believe this is Helen. Yeah, if you'd like to come in, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to join the meeting this evening. Hopefully you've had opportunity to read a brief covering report and also quite a chunky SRS draft
business plan for 23-24. It was circulated a little bit late in the day. My apologies for that, but it is hot off the press. And this is coming to you for pre-decision scrutiny because it will be presented to the SRS Joint Committee next week. I'm going to rely on Mark to assist me now because I've prepared some slides. Obviously that report or that plan is way too big for me to go through page by page. So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to take you through some slides which hopefully will walk you through the process, and we'll look at some of the achievements that we've had in the last year, which are all set out in full in the plan itself. And also some of the sort of hot topics that we see will be heavily involved with in the coming months. So if you could go to the next slide, Mark. Thank you.
And just to check with the committee, everyone can see the slideshow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I can see it.
Thank you.
So I'm sure members are familiar, but it's just as well for me to give a touch of the background to the shared service. Came into existence in 2015, and we deliver the environmental health, trading standards and licensing functions across the local authority areas of Bridgend, Cardiff and of course the Vale of Glamorgan. We're hosted by the Vale of Glamorgan Council and we have a single management structure. Got about 180 staff there or thereabouts across those different professions. So governance of the shared service is through a joint working agreement. That is our sort of manual for how things are delivered. The joint committee, which is created as a result of the what is set out in the joint working agreement, and scrutiny arrangements, which are not bespoke for the service, but they are the scrutiny arrangements across the respective councils. So I'm here to speak with you this evening. I will present the business plan to a Cardiff Scrutiny Committee and to a Bridgend Scrutiny Committee in the coming months. So we go to the next slide, Mark. And just so you're aware, the Joint Committee comprises 6 members, 2 from each of the 3 participant councils. The current chair is Councillor Sivignano, but the chair rotates once a year at the annual general meeting, which is next week. So next week, the chair will become Councillor Rhys-Good from Bridgend County Borough Council. The chair rotates, and Cardiff, Councillor Diath will become the vice chair. So that is a regular rotation every year. Go to the next slide, Matt. And just to touch on the structure, it's something which came out of the original modelling, which we've stayed with because it works so well. So rather than being structured as environmental health, trading standards, licensing, which are the functions that we provide, we've got this different structure which looks really at function more than the actual profession. So just very briefly, we've got the 3 sectors of neighbourhood services. So that is those services impacting domestic properties and having an impact in local communities. And we're talking here about things like private sector housing, pollution services, and of course licensing. Commercial services, that sector regulates business premises, particularly where we're talking about supply to the ultimate consumer, so sort of retail supply. And within that, we've got all the food inspection programme, port health, health and safety, trading standards, and communicable disease. And then the third of the sectors, enterprise and specialist services, and this one is really quite diverse. We've got our major investigations team sitting in there, the Wales Illegal Money Lending Unit, and specialist teams like air quality, contaminated land, the animal health and welfare team. So quite a diverse mix within that section, and also something that we call our industry team, which looks at the non-retail functions across the different trade sectors. And within that team as well, we look very much at income generation, which has been something that we've, I think we've done very well on since 2015, but clearly in the current public finance situation, it's something that we are hoping to move up a gear in the year ahead. And at the heart of all of that, of course, is the customer and the interface. We've got there on that slide as admin, but it is our business support team who do a great job in interfacing with all the service users. So if we could go to the next slide, Matt. So just a quick slide to remind you of the way that we produce the business plan. So this is something that obviously we do on an annual basis, and we distill the corporate priorities for the 3 participant councils into what we call strategic themes. The corporate priorities are looking quite different to each other. So what we do is to distill it in, as I say, into these strategic themes, which then translate into the actions through the course of the year. So we look at this strategically. We're looking at what is on the horizon, what is the emerging themes, what's the new legislation which is coming our way, but also feeding up on through a sort of operational means as well, so that the team managers are all very much involved in this process of agreeing the business plan for the year ahead. And the next one, Mark, please. So the strategic themes that I mentioned earlier, there are 5 of them, and they, between them, mop up all that we do. So the first is improving health and well-being. The second one, protecting the environment, supporting the local economy, safeguarding the vulnerable, and then the one in the middle, it's that one that underpins them all, really, maximising use of resources, and clearly coming into the shared service, that was one of the drivers, as well as getting that extra resilience in the service and maintaining expertise. It was about realising some cost savings, and we continue to do that. So if we could go to the next slide, Mark. I'm going to zoom in now on just one of those strategic themes, just to illustrate. So I picked the supporting the local economy theme. So we've got some examples there of the outcomes that we want to see. For example, the first one, a fair trading environment is maintained, and the outputs for us to achieve that. We're looking to protect legitimate traders. We're looking to take swift and firm action against the rogue traders. So hopefully that will explain how we translate those themes into actions. And of course, in the business plan itself, there will be a section detailing how we do that for each of those corporate themes. But that's just one example to show you how, what the thinking is behind that. And then if we can go to the next one, Mark. And there it is, quite a long process to get there. We started the process in January, and it takes a while to pull all that together and get it into the format that you will have received. So what I'd like to do now is to just reflect on the previous year, just to pull out some elements from the business plan where we reflect on achievements for the last year. So if we could move slides, Mark. So as I say, just a few examples. The plan is packed full of them. But what I would say is that the year just gone has been another transition year. Where we were this time last year, we were still heavily involved with a lot of those COVID-related structures and considerations. That's been really pared back right through the course of 22-23. However, we still have an involvement. We've got a number of health protection officers within the structure, and we still provide support to high-risk settings such as care homes. But again, another transition year as we move out of the COVID phase, but becoming more and more part of the wider health protection system with various partners. So something else that we were heavily involved with over the course of 22-23 was the aftermath of those COVID years and recovering the lost ground on our inspection programmes. And I just highlighted a few there: food, housing, pollution and trading standards interventions. So we are making headway. The food programme, unfortunately, because there is such a backlog within that, we are having to work hard to reduce that backlog, and we've been working with the Food Standards Agency, as have other authorities, to make sure that we're addressing in a risk-based manner the visits and interventions that we need to carry out. Also in 22-23 it was quite a year, wasn't it? We assisted the partner authorities in dealing with a number of global events. Obviously the cost of living crisis, which has underpinned so much of what we've done in the last year, and the war in Ukraine, and SRS officers assisted the three authorities in inspecting homes for suitability under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. And then a little bit more detail on the next slide, if you could, Mark. Lovely, thank you. So just to pull out a few facts and figures from the business plan, over the course of 22-23, over 90% of reported scams and doorstep crime incidents were prevented or resolved through SRS intervention. 28 prosecution cases were concluded in court, and that covers the real breadth of the various functions that we provide. 28 sounds a lot, but 28 is recovering from the again the COVID delays in the court process. I looked back the other day to our output in terms of concluded prosecution cases in the 2018-19 financial year, and surprised myself, actually. I hadn't appreciated just what the gulf is. There were 77 cases concluded there, so we've got an awful lot in the pipeline which are concluding, but it is taking a time for those to work through the court system. Some of the ones that have concluded over the course of the year: conviction of 4 rogue traders and doorstep criminals. These crimes really are the lowest of the low, but I'm really pleased to report that we were successful in sentencing, nearly 3 years in custodial sentences for those 4 individuals, a 12-month community order, and compensation of around £6,000 awarded to some of those affected. Not nearly enough, but something that those individuals, those residents, would not have had otherwise. During 22-23, we've gone through a rebranding of the Wales Illegal Money Lending Unit, and I know the Scrutiny Committee has been very supportive of the work of what we know as the WIMLU, and you've had dedicated presentations on the work of the unit. So they have rebranded, so the public face of the Wales Illegal Money Lending Unit is now Stop Loan Sharks Wales, which we feel is a much more descriptive and user-friendly name, and it's all about driving understanding, awareness of the awful crime of illegal money lending and getting people to report it. So we're hopeful that the rebrand and the new website will assist us in that. And then I just put a stat on there. It wouldn't be a business plan without a mention of our work combating illegal tobacco, and some more pretty significant seizures over the course of the year, and many more in the pipeline. Can we go on to the next slide, Matt? I'm going to move now to looking ahead to the current year. So in 23-24, the challenges for the service, and no surprise, we will continue to recover that lost ground. As I say, working with the Food Standards Agency to make sure that that is done as effectively as possible. But we also have to make up lost ground in other respects, and some of our paid for services, particularly our training courses, had to be put on the back burner during the course of the COVID pandemic. We couldn't train people face to face. We were developing online solutions, but it will be so good now to get back into the classroom and delivering training for businesses. And of course, there's income for the service from that. So that's something that we're really getting back on top of this year. We continue to have difficulties in recruitment and retention in those professional roles. And we are developing a workforce strategy to really look at things as differently as we can, embrace new ideas. We've got some really good working arrangements with Cardiff Met for the environmental health degree course, building up good relationship there. And I'm really pleased to report that after months, years actually of pushing, the regulatory apprenticeship is actually under development. So we're very, very much looking forward to opening the door to the first intake of regulatory apprentices as soon as that goes live. At the same time, there are a number of areas of new regulation that we will need to embrace. Some of that will come in during the course of this year. Some of it will go into next year, but there's a lot of prep to do in readiness for that. And we will be doing all of that within a reduced budget because, unfortunately, the current state of the public sector finances is such that we have had to have a budget saving for this year, and we wait to see what next year brings on budget. So on to the next slide, Mark, if you could, and I just want to touch on some of the hot topics really. And again, I just pulled these from the business plan. I could have picked any of them, but I thought you might find some of these quite interesting. So vapes, probably seen a lot of this in the media recently. I think Rishi Sunak has had some quite strong opinions on e-cigarettes or vapes, particularly the disposable vapes, which seem to be causing a particular problem at the moment. And I thought that graphic sort of captured a lot there. We're looking at brightly coloured, attractive products. We're looking at things now, you go into a corner shop and you will see what perhaps used to be a tobacco gantry, which we've got used to having the sliding doors since the tobacco display ban has come in. All of a sudden, they seem to be quite colourful again, but it's all vapes and it's all electronic cigarettes and the accessories to go with that, the liquids, etc. So that is perfectly legal. There is no display ban on electronic cigarettes and disposable vapes. But clearly, a lot of the same arguments that were had about the promotion of tobacco and the packaging of tobacco, they're borne out in terms of who those products are being aimed at. So vapes clearly have, or electronic cigarettes, they play an important role in assisting smokers to give up the habit. And really what the markets and regulators are trying to do is to find that happy medium in controlling it sufficiently so it doesn't harm other people, but at the same time recognizing that they do have a legitimate role in assisting smokers to quit the habit. We go on to the next slide, Mark. Just sticking with vapes for a second, just to illustrate some of the facts and figures that you'll find in the business plan. So that the issues with vapes, first of all, supply to the under 18s, and we are experiencing quite a problem with this. We've done a number of test purchase attempts over the course of the year. and the failure rate, so the number of attempts, or the proportion of attempts to purchase by a young volunteer that result in a sale, is round about 24% for the supply to under 18s. I've touched then on the supply of illegal vapes, and that again is running at about 37%. So that is not specifically in relation to underage people. It could be anyone going in to attempt to purchase an illegal vape. And we're finding that 37% of those attempts result in an illegal vape being delivered. And by illegal, what I mean is that it doesn't comply with the regulations. It won't be registered with the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency. The liquid strength might be too strong, so it might have too much nicotine in it. Liquid volume might be too great. There's a limit of 2 millilitres, but we're seeing products with liquid volume far in excess of that. There are also environmental concerns. So vapes, they touch on a lot of things, a lot of themes here. Environmental concerns about their disposal. They should be properly recycled. A lot are just thrown away. And there's an estimate that 1.3 million single-use vapes are thrown away every week. And if they were laid out, apparently, according to this research by Material Focus, that will cover 22 football pitches, which is just amazing in the space of a week. Vapes, the disposable vapes, they will have lithium batteries in them as well. And again, there's issues in terms of their disposal. And if they're just dumped, then the issues with heavy metals and the potential for batteries to ignite if they're not dealt with properly. And all of that impacts on our ability when we're seizing illegal vapes, and we seized around 5,500 illegal vapes over the course of 22-23, with a retail value of around £51,000. We have difficulties in then disposing of those seized products because of those issues with recycling them appropriately. And the last point there, I've got a photograph to illustrate the concern that some of these products, some of these liquids, could be mistaken for a drink. They are very, very toxic if they are ingested by mouth, if they're drunk. But clearly a child might find that quite appealing if that was left on a coffee table. So again, that's another area that we are looking at. I'll move on to the next hot topic, if I may. So we go down the slide, Mark. And this is the minimum energy efficiency standards for private rented sector. This is a piece of work that we've been in preparation for over the course of the last year, but we're now in the process of engaging with landlords and letting agents. And it's all about making sure that the properties that are being rented to tenants, that their energy efficiency is no worse than an E rating on the EPC certificate. So hopefully that little graphic at the bottom of the slide explains what we're looking for there. So all rented property now should have an energy efficiency category of between A and E. So F and G are no longer allowed. So our work is to track those down, to work with the landlords and letting agents, and unless there is a bona fide exemption which is registered, then we will work with them to make sure that the necessary improvements are made. We hope that we don't have to resort to too much enforcement action. We hope that we'll be able to work with the landlords and letting agents. And then the benefit of all of that, of course, is that we will be able to feed into each of the partner councils some really useful stats on how our interventions have reduced carbon tonnage, reduced energy use in the improved properties in kilowatt hours, and the reduction in energy use in terms of money. And again, this plays into both the climate change and the cost of living agendas. That's the minimum energy efficiency standards, or MEES as we call them. And then moving to the next slide, Mark, if we may. But I just put a slide up here on empty homes. And when I came to Scrutiny last year, I was asked the question about why we were reporting differently on our empty homes work for Bridgend and Cardiff, but not reporting for the Vale. And it's just been the fact that the way we've worked within the Vale has been different. But I can advise that from this year on, we will be able to have an input into that empty homes work in the Vale of Glamorgan in the same way that we are with Bridgend and the Vale. So some additional resource, which obviously is going to be really helpful in taking the necessary enforcement action to ensure that empty homes, long-term empty homes, are brought back into use. And then on to the next slide, if we may, Mark, and the last of my hot topics. And unfortunately, dog breeding continues to be a real problem. It's a source of a significant number of complaints into the service. In previous years, I've reported successful, quite high profile prosecution cases on illegal dog breeding, or the animal welfare concerns arising from licensed dog breeding in one case. I haven't got any concluded cases to report this year. There are a number in the pipeline, so they will be reported on before too much longer. But unfortunately, the demand for puppies, particularly those desirable breeds, continues. It is very, very lucrative, unfortunately, for some rogues that have entered the market. So we have recently raised our concerns with Welsh Government around the very narrow definition of dog breeding, and we've suggested that in any review that the wider sort of allied work that goes alongside dog breeding, things like the provision of stud services and other fertility services, that because it's inextricably linked with what these breeders are doing, that those elements should also be licensed, and that should be brought into within the licensing regime. And then on to the next slide, Mark, if we may. Just to mention some of the things very briefly that are on the horizon. I mentioned some new legislation and areas of work that are heading our way. Special procedures framework, we believe now that will go live from April 24, and of course that is the new framework which will apply to practitioners who are involved with tattooing, with acupuncture, with body piercing, and so on. So it's quite an infrastructure there for the licensing, and also for us to provide training, because those practitioners have to attain a recognised qualification for them to be able to get themselves licensed. Also on the horizon is the Environmental Protection Single-Use Plastic Products Wales Act, and this legislation will outlaw certain single-use plastic. So I put a picture of straws there, but from autumn 23, the intention is that it'll be things like straws, plates, cutlery, and stirrers that can no longer be supplied to a consumer in Wales. And then there'll be a second phase, probably after 2024, when other single-use plastic products will come into the mix. I've mentioned as well the Environment, Air Quality and Soundscapes Wales Bill, something else which is on the horizon. as and when that comes in, we anticipate that that new legislation will provide a framework for setting national air quality targets, so some changes there. That they will amend the legislation relating to local air quality management, and also legislation relating to smoke control. So quite a large, broad area of work there. So we'll watch with interest to see what that brings. And now I think I'm on to the last slide, Mark, if we may. And that was just to summarise really where I came in. The business plan will be presented to the SRS Joint Committee next week, next Wednesday on the 21st of June. I have sent the draft plan out to a number of partner agencies, and I'm still getting feedback in on that. So the plan may be subject to some change prior to it being presented. And I would really welcome thoughts of the Scrutiny Committee on the plan and any ideas for improvement, and obviously very happy to take questions.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? But before they do, I want to say thank you very much to Helen for that very informative presentation. I can see Councillor Carroll has his hand up.
Yes, thank you, Helen, for that very informative presentation. And Chair, may I begin by apologising for arriving slightly late to this meeting.
That's
I
fine.
did my best, but traffic caught me on that one. Two questions, if I may, please, Helen. The first one is to do with the waste collection changes that are coming into force, particularly the change to 3 weekly cycles on black bag collections. I was wondering if environmental health had carried out any assessment on the potential impacts this may have, particularly regarding flats, because in my own ward there are a number of blocks of flats, particularly I think they're almost all social rented actually, and residents have approached me with concerns. I was out on a Sunday and the collection day was the following Tuesday as it was. I happened to be walking around, and it was on a, as you know, at the moment, they've got a 2 weekly cycle. And she just took me to show the communal bin area. And she basically pointed it out to me and said, look, this is overflowing already. And there were several black bags on top of the existing containers because they had overflowed. And her point was quite reasonably, if we add an extra week onto that with the collection, obviously there's going to be even more waste again. And in one of the blocks in particular, and I have raised this with, it was either you or a colleague, Helen, I raised it privately, there was an issue with rats in the communal bin area as it was. So I was just wondering if there had been any assessment from SRS on the potential environmental health impact of those changes and whether any measures need to be put in place to mitigate them. And secondly, and forgive me if you've already answered this because I came in late, it was on slide 15, the category 1 hazards in relation to HMOs in the private rented sector. I noticed that in 21-22, the figures for the cases that were resolved, they seem quite low across the board, to be honest with you. I mean, the Vale was at 15.38%, and they were higher in Bridgend and Cardiff, but if I'm being honest, not much higher. I was just wondering if that's to be expected, because from a layperson's point of view, those numbers seem quite low, and you'd expect a far higher percentage than that to be resolved, particularly since category 1 seems, I'm assuming that's the most serious type of hazard. So yeah, if you could provide some background on that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Carroll. Just to start with your first question, there hasn't been an assessment carried out by environmental health on the issue that you described, but obviously we would look at things on a case-by-case basis. So if a resident reported a concern to us, then we would certainly look at that, or obviously if it was something that came through their ward member as well. I can see that Mike has got his hand up. I don't know whether I could perhaps bring Mike in here if you wanted to add to that.
Chair, if you're happy for me to clarify the issue specifically around flats. The council's new 3 weekly collection process won't include flats at this stage. And as a landlord, landlord of quite a number of flats within the Vale of Glamorgan, we will be working with colleagues in cleansing and with colleagues in SRS with regards an appropriate response to how we will address the issue of how to improve our recycling targets for our flatted dwellings, but recognising that issues such as storage and other things will have to be dealt with as part of that proposal. So just to reassure that flats are not included in the current proposals for 3 weekly collections, and there will be some work done in the background to try and reassure residents that measures are in place, that we don't have the issues of rats and other things that you've highlighted, Councillor.
Thanks, Mike. So can I go on to the second question, Councillor Carroll? Yeah, lovely. So yes, I take your point, and it's something that we've looked at over the course of the year. It is a quirk of the way the stats are reported. And what we're looking to do for future years is to provide statistics for our work in relation to both Category 1 and Category 2 hazards, which will give a far better representation of the work that is being done. It is unfortunately a quirk of the way the stats are recorded.
And if I could just raise a further point on that. Do you compile those stats for the social rented sector as well?
No, it'll be our work in the private rented sector.
Is the social rented sector assessed?
I'm not sure you're going to get an appropriate answer on that tonight. It may be something to discuss with Mike outside of the meeting.
Councillor Carroll, I can confirm that all social landlords are required for their properties to achieve the Welsh Housing Quality Standard. That standard takes into account the housing health and safety rating system upon which the categorisation of risk is identified, and social landlords are required to address Category 1 and serious risks. The Renting Homes Act, which was introduced at the turn of the year, which had been, as members will probably be aware, 6 years in the making before it was finally implemented because of COVID and obviously other national issues, was implemented in December. And there is a requirement on all landlords, social or otherwise, to remove category or to reduce Category 1 hazards. So social landlords, to a certain extent, are regulated, but via different sort of mechanism by which Helen would regulate a private tenant or a private owner, in that there's a great more deal of self-regulation, I guess. And as a responsible social landlord, where we identify Category 1 risks, we will do our utmost to resolve those issues as quickly as possible. Sometimes it isn't always immediately possible to do so, and we have to consider, I guess, plans and putting projects together in order to address some of those issues. So if we take, I suppose, a very pertinent issue at the moment in dampness and condensation, we will shortly bring in a policy before Cabinet in relation to the social housing stock, which will indicate how we will address that issue. In some instances, we're not able to immediately address that because there are a number of reasons why our properties might become damp or suffer from condensation. And some of those things require capital improvements. So, for example, external wall insulation may be required on some properties in order to improve the thermal value of the walls, in which case to reduce the levels of condensation, moisture condensation on those walls. So we are aware of them and plans are put in place, but as a social landlord, absolutely, it is our intention clearly to resolve all risks as we identify them.
To clarify, Chair, this is the last point I'll make on this. I wasn't actually aiming that at the council as a landlord. It's and again, Helen will be, I won't mention the case for obvious reasons, but Helen will be aware of a case in my own ward of a social landlord where there was a damp issue and it took considerable prodding and intervention, I may say, from yourself, and I'm very grateful to the work that you did to actually help address that issue. But the social landlord was not as proactive as I would have expected, quite honestly. And I appreciate that that would be an issue for Welsh Government, but I do think it's something worth considering if self-regulation is operating effectively, if issues such as mould and damp aren't being addressed in a timely manner. But it wasn't, to clarify, it wasn't the authority on that occasion that was the landlord. It was another social provider. But thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Lloyd Selby, if you'd like to come in.
Thank you. If I may, Chair, I've got a couple of comments and a couple of questions. Is that okay if I do them all at once?
Yes, as long as everybody is happy for you to do that format and they can keep up with you, that's fine.
I'll be as quick as I can. So, Helen, thank you. Thank you for providing such a helpful and informative report. I'm a newly elected member and a new member to this committee, so it was really interesting to be able to read the report and understand the breadth of the work that the service is involved in. I thought it was particularly helpful to include the case studies. That was a great way of illustrating very clearly the role that the service has to play. I think that's helpful in terms of sending a message to those who might step outside regulation, but also very reassuring for members of the public to see that action is taken and the outcome of that action. So thank you for that work. I note the report quite rightly, repeatedly raises concerns that the full impact of cost of living crisis has not yet been realised. The report makes it very clear that the service is facing pressure as a result both of COVID-19, and you've talked about that tonight, but also cost of living crisis. And I noticed that the risk register says there's a high risk of impact on service delivery because of cost pressures. It also helpfully says that you're taking steps to mitigate those cost pressures in terms of taking a risk-based approach to priorities. So my question is, if that kind of assessment of priorities, given the pressure you're already experiencing and the pressure that's likely to be in front of you as those cost of living increases continue to impact, if you're having to reprioritise, how will that be communicated if that has a significant impact in any area of business?
Yeah, excellent question. And it would be a case of having to set out exactly what we need to provide, and making some quite hard, well, very hard decisions as to what things do we stop delivering. We have had conversations of that nature in the last year when we were looking at possible budget savings going into this financial year. And fortunately, we've been able to hold it all together and continue to deliver all the services. But clearly there will come a point if the public sector finances are such that we have to sustain budget saving after budget saving, where something will have to give, and that will need to be some sort of consultation, I would suggest, as to exactly what it is that we stop doing. There is a school of thought, quite a simplistic one in my view, that perhaps we should only provide statutory services. But very often it's the non-statutory services that really make a difference, and we pride ourselves on. I talk at length in the business plan about the work that we do to safeguard older people to safeguard vulnerable people, the installation of the call blockers, which are absolutely life-changing for people who are being preyed on by scammers. That's not statutory. So if we were to say, sorry, statutory only, we lose a lot of that richness of what we can provide, and a lot of the sort of problem solving that we do to assist councillors with some of the tricky issues that you sometimes encounter. Again, a lot of that probably wouldn't be statutory. So it's a difficult set of decisions that would have to be made. And I would hope that we can come up with as many innovative ways to being able to deliver services for as long as we can, but clearly there will come a point where that isn't possible.
Thank you, Helen. Chair, I wonder if we could reflect that back to Cabinet in terms of that risk assessment, and that it might be helpful for the report just to set out what the process would be in the event that there had to be a significant reprioritisation of services, particularly as you said, Helen, there would likely need to be some form of consultation depending on the significance of that decision. I think it might be helpful for that to be included within the report. And my other observation is, I think it's such a helpful report, particularly for us as councillors and our role with local communities to understand, as I say, the breadth of the work that you're engaged in, because I confess I hadn't understood that fully at all until I read this report. And I wonder when the report is finalised, whether we can also recommend that it should be shared with all elected members so that everybody has the opportunity, to have that as a reference point to understand more about the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd-Selby. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, thank you for your patience.
No, thank you, Chair.
You're muted again.
Oh,
it happens so easily, does it? You accidentally press something. Yeah.
Sticky, sweaty fingers, I'm embarrassed to say, but yeah, but thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak. And Helen, yeah, I'd like to echo comments made already with regards to the comprehensive report. I appreciate that it's taken a considerable amount of time to put together, simply because despite the challenges, you and the team have clearly sort of achieved quite a considerable amount, and that must be, obviously credit to you and the team. So I hope that that's reflected in the meeting this evening. I'd like to sort of also sort of echo Councillor Lloyd-Selby's comments, in that I'd like to make a couple of comments and raise and almost make a few asks as well in terms of your report. And I've done it in looking at the report itself, which is for example, on page 27, and you've referenced this in the challenges just now on protecting vulnerable adults, and in particular older people. And sadly, in my ward, what we've already seen is some sort of develops, and we're seeing some scammers visiting cold calling. So clearly you and the service is doing all that it can, but is there any way in which you can reach out to sort of us as councillors, and is there any way in which we can remind fellow councillors of our responsibility as we all sort of take part in all the summer community events and fetes, and whilst we're having our photos taken with residents, it would be good if we could perhaps help sort of circulate the information on scammers and making sort of vulnerable people in particular more aware. And you referenced the hairdresser project, which clearly was really successful and really went so well across, I believe it was in Penarth and Cowbridge. Yeah. And is there any capacity to sort of adapt that and take that out into the community? And I'm thinking, just top of my head, local WI groups who meet on a regular basis, as well as the local neighbourhood watch. And again, sort of, sort of ensure that councillors can sort of, tap into their local contacts, because this is a massive issue for us. And as we've already recognised in previous meetings, we do have an ageing population. We do have a large percentage of vulnerable adults who live home alone as well, who may be more susceptible to this. So that would be my first ask. And the second then is on page 30, and again, you've referenced it, and you around safeguarding of children and vaping. And this is such good news about the sort of resources that are allocated to tackling this. And I just hope that our local MP doesn't accept any donations from this industry, as he did in with the tobacco industry. And illegal money laundering. Have you, with the cost of living crisis clearly taking a severe grip on people in the Vale? Has, you've referenced sort of the work that sort of you've undertaken so far, and I appreciate that this is, we're only so far into 2023-24 plan, but are you seeing the prevalence of that in some of the more sort of vulnerable areas of the Vale? And again, anything that you can do to sort of communicate with councillors to remind them of the links that we have to communities, to try and I suppose keep an eye on things and sort of the behaviour around illegal money laundering, because sadly from family experience it has a devastating impact and it tears families apart, as you well know. Appendix 2 with regards to the private rental sector and social landlords, and I think, Chair, we touched upon this at the last meeting, is about sort of perhaps picking that up and looking at that in through a task and finish project in terms of the private rental sector. And the reality is that in the Vale, we there is a relationship between us as a local authority and the private rental sector, and it's and in particular as the social landlords. And as we're looking at the energy efficiency standards coming in, the empty homes, and again, the impact of the cost of living crisis on vulnerable renters, I think that would perhaps something I would ask that we sort of look at putting forward, going sort of ahead in the autumn. And it's a question really for you and Mike, because it was referenced, Mike, I think you referenced it with the sort of the wall insulation. And is it true that sort of the lack of contractors and skilled workers able to take on this particular work is greatly diminished, which has left the gaps across the UK, which has led to social landlords not being able to get this work done, hence the reason why they're perhaps is there linked to increases in sort of damp and mold? And I just wanted to see if that was, if that was correct. Thank you. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Sorry, Helen, sorry, I don't know if you wanted to go first.
If you want to go first, Mike, because it's relevant to Councillor's last point.
Yeah. Helen mentioned in her presentation some potentially unrealistic timescales in running through some of the legislative and statutory requirements. I mentioned earlier social landlords were required to achieve WHQS for their social housing stock. Welsh Government have consulted and are considering implementing a new WHQS framework, so the Welsh Housing Quality Standard Framework 23 for next year. We're still yet to receive the final guidance in terms of what that's going to say. One of the concerns that we've raised, and particularly in relation to optimised retrofit and refitting our council homes, is about the timescales to do so. The consultation talked around council properties achieving EPC-A or SAP 92 by 2033, so 10 years from next year, but a stage requirement that we should achieve high-level SAP-C by the end of next year, and EPC-B, sorry, by 2031. There are a couple of issues there. One is that that's massive investment. That's huge, millions and millions and millions of pounds of investment by the council in its housing stock. And what we're finding at the moment is that it's a challenge to find contractors in the market that are available when you need them, and hence some of the issues that we've reported over the last year around our ability to deliver capital projects and some of the issues that we've had there. But equally, certainly in terms of optimised retrofit and the technology and the requirements to install, are there enough installers out there is there enough product initially? Do we have enough solar panels? do we have enough fitters who are going to be in a position to fit that number of solar panels that were required? What about the battery technology? What about contractors and that are able to install thousands and thousands and thousands of these units across Wales all at the same time? And the challenge that we're finding is that where we are, for example, external wall insulation, we're having very limited numbers of contractors coming forward bidding for our work. And if they are bidding, we do like to try and keep the Vale pound in the Vale, or certainly within the region, and certainly within Wales if we can. But more and more often we're having to engage with contractors from outside of Wales, just in order to attract bidders. And I think that's a challenge locally in terms of how we respond to the circular economy discussion as a local authority, given the amount of spending power that we have across the council for all works, whether they're housing, highways, or whatever it may be. But equally a discussion with Welsh Government around how do you grow an economy that currently isn't there, to achieve the aspirations of us as a nation in terms of achieving carbon zero. So yes, I can agree that yes, it is extremely challenging at the moment, and there's an awful lot of work going to be required over the next few years to achieve anything near a target of 2033 to achieve EPCA. And of course, as a council, we want to build brand new houses, and of course they will already achieve EPCA by the time our first residents move into them. There will be no retrofit for those. So we're having to balance both that sort of investment in the existing stock, also against the requirement to and our challenge to assist in contributing to the 20,000 new affordable homes within Wales by the end of this Welsh Government term. Hopefully that clarifies that issue. I mean, I would pick up on one other thing possibly associated with something that Helen has mentioned around private sector, and it sort of alludes to the comment that Councillor Carroll raised equally earlier in the debate around private sector, whether they be social landlords or private landlords. We've had to rely on that sector for many years to provide accommodation to assist us in discharging our statutory duties. And Welsh Government at the moment are starting to look at private sector as part of the solution, as well as understanding the complexity of the private sector in terms of being able to assist Wales in being able to deliver in what is a housing crisis at the moment. And the challenge for local authorities like our own, where we're in the top 3 in terms of average house prices, us and Monmouth usually are towards the top of the tree, where we have rentals, where again we're in the top 3 in the nation in terms of our average rents. We're in the top 3 in terms of the disparity between local housing allowance and the average rentals currently in the Vale. And interestingly, as a committee, you may wish to look at those issues about how you could impact and influence how we utilise the private rented sector in the future. What measures might we consider as a council implementing? Which agencies may we wish to lobby as a council? We have no control over local housing allowance rates. That's a UK-led policy area. However, there's an acknowledgement that it is becoming increasingly difficult for the lowest 30% quartile, i.e. those that are in the most need of affordable housing, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for that lowest 30th quartile to actually, 30% quartile to actually access any affordable housing at all. And of course, you know, we all know the pressures that the council is under in its own stock. But sorry to interfere in that response, but it just gives a little bit in terms of the work that SRS are doing around the regulation side, but equally about how do we encourage private sector investment and private sector landlords to assist the local authority in discharging some of our, you know, chronic housing issues that we currently have at the moment.
Thank you, Mike.
Shall I come back to?
Yes, of course.
I think I've jotted them down correctly, but correct me if I've missed anything. So, Councillor, the first point that you mentioned was in relation to doorstep crime and how we could equip ward members to actually engage. And I think it's all about spotting the signs, having that awareness, being able to report in a timely fashion, and give some timely advice to individuals to help them avoid falling into a trap with a doorstep criminal or a rogue trader. And I make it sound so easy, but it isn't. In terms of getting those messages across, can be very, very sensitive conversations where people feel that they've been silly, they've been stupid, they've done something wrong. And we try to reinforce the message, absolutely not. It happens to the very best. It isn't something that only happens to vulnerable or elderly people. It happens to everyone. And I think there is an element of, you know, we all like a bargain. And if somebody comes along and says, I can do your driveway, you don't need to pay, you know, £9,000 for it, I'll do it for 3. Then people, before they know it, they have entered into a deal with quite often rogues or worse, doorstep criminals. So I think working together, we can get some carefully crafted messages so that it can be a two-way dialogue where you can get some timely information to residents, but also acting as eyes and ears so that if there are warning signs, that can be communicated back to the service, because we would really, really welcome that. We do a rapid response if there is an issue going on at a property. Then we will respond, usually with a police officer, but we've got a memorandum of understanding for that, and we will do that wherever we can in real time. And quite often we've actually confronted these criminals there and then. I wish every case could be like that, but sometimes we only find out after the event. So yeah, whatever we can do to work together, I'd really, really welcome that. And I think your last point about the Wales Illegal Money Lending Unit and helping to get those messages out, I think again that is something that we can work on together. There has been an uptick, a definite uptick in the referrals that we're getting through for illegal money lending. We always thought that this was going to be something that would come through the system with something of a time lag. But I think as we progress through the cost of living crisis, then we are seeing more and more. I don't have the specific stats as to whether there are particular areas of the Vale that are being badly affected, because of course the unit covers the whole of Wales, but I can certainly find out for you and report back. And our real fear, cost of living crisis, you know, we mentioned earlier that its effects are only really just beginning for some people. And I think we've all heard some awful stats in recent weeks about mortgage holders who've been on a fixed rate. And talk about the rug being pulled. You're going from, you know, a couple of percent up to 6-7% on your next fixed deal, and that has an enormous effect on income and disposable income. So we're fully anticipating that we will see more and more of this, where people are not able to cope and are unfortunately resorting to illegal money lenders. You mentioned also the hairdresser project. and whether that could be expanded, and maybe I think you mentioned engaging with perhaps local WI groups, etc. So I kind of go back to where we came in with this hairdressers project, and the hairdressers project was a bit of a flash of inspiration, I suppose, to get us around the difficulty that we were having through COVID, of not being able to have those, get a room full of people, tea and biscuits, and have a chat about it. So that's something that we're very much getting back on board with now. So talks to WI groups, etc., will come back into our business as usual. The hairdresser project was something that we did thinking outside the box, so that we could continue to get those messages through, but it has been really, really successful. And it's all about you know, people will talk to barbers, they will talk to hairdressers about pretty much anything. There are no limits. So it's a brilliant place, again, to get those key messages out so that we can help people in those situations. And I think that the final point you've made, apologies, I've done these completely out of order, was the safeguarding of young people and the discussion that we had about vapes. Yeah, we're really, really keen to work on this, because this is the next big thing. Some of the London boroughs, trading standards, they see this as the biggest risk of what they're dealing with, because of everything that's happening on the periphery of it, and the fact that it touches on so many different levels. So we're going to be all over that, and I'd be more than happy to report back to update on what we find during the course of the year.
I look forward to hearing that update. Thank you, Helen. I believe Councillor Perks would like to come in. Thank you, Sandra, for being so patient.
Thank you, Chair. No, that's great. It was interesting listening to all the questions and the answers. A few things I just wanted to ask and or say. So from this week, I understand, or the 6th of June, that Julie James has launched a green paper consultation on a call for guidance on securing a path towards adequate housing, including fair rent and affordability. So I'm assuming that obviously the Vale will be part of that, and obviously giving their evidence towards that as well, because I think it's up until September, isn't it, Mike, for that one?
15th of September.
Yeah. So, and the other thing I wanted to actually ask Helen about was the empty homes work that you're going to be working with the empty homes officer, which is good news, because there's quite a few empty homes within the Vale, and I know the officer for there works really hard on, you know, sort of trying to bring them back into use. And I just wondered if you've worked with Bridgend and Cardiff already, what sort of effect has SRS had in helping to move the actual process along and getting those houses back into use for, you know, sort of people within the Vale. And then I did have a question about sort of illegal cigarette selling, and whether we have a breakdown of the geographical area where the most problems could be in the Vale. So yeah, so just those really. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, Councillor Perks. On the empty homes, yeah, we're really, really pleased that we're going to be able to play a greater role in Vale Glamorgan to get empty homes back into a usable condition. It's something that we've done from the inception of SRS in Bridgend and in Cardiff, and it was just the way that the arrangements fell, because we got quite bespoke arrangements with each of the 3 local authorities. As well as our core services, we provide authority specific services, and up until now the empty homes input for SRS has been authority specific for Bridgend and for Cardiff. Now we'll be able to have a greater involvement, and the difference will be from the point of view of having that dedicated resource, which will in effect be an environmental health officer with the necessary powers and qualifications to be able to do the necessary enforcement work. Up until now, within the Vale, the empty homes teams do a fantastic job They call us in as and when to do a piece of enforcement, but it's very much on a reactive basis. What we're going to be able to do now going forward is to do that on a proactive basis, very much work as a team. And I think we will, really deliver some great results together.
Thank you. That sounds great.
So that was that one. The illegal cigarettes, I don't have a breakdown of where they're most likely to be found across the Vale. I can certainly get some facts and figures together on that just to give an idea. But what I would say is that I know from experience that exercises to map seizures of illegal tobacco, which is a very good indication of where the illegal tobacco is, but exercises to map those seizures onto a map of Wales, and it really replicates very, very closely the areas of greatest deprivation, as you might expect. So I would fully expect that that would be the same in the Vale, and that's certainly the basis that we work on with our intelligence-led work on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Buckley.
Chair, thank you for allowing me to speak, and thank you, committee members. Helen, thank you for your report. I got 3 points or questions. One's expanding on Councillor Lovelock-Edwards' points regarding the doorstep crime, and one regarding Councillor Carroll's stuff with the rats. With the doorstep crime, it's awesome to see the amount of work that you've done without having had elderly relatives who've been victims of this stuff. I thank you and your team for everything that you're doing. My only concern is you had 4 convictions between the 4 of them. And I know it might be outside of the council, but is there any way we can feed up the chain that the penalty is not relevant to the benefits to the criminal? Regarding the vapes, I totally accept their needs in smoking cessation for people who smoke for many, many years. However, they outlawed mint flavoured cigarettes to stop children wanting to do it, and you can buy vapes that are strawberry flavoured, cherry flavoured, number of sweet flavoured. So is there any comeback with us going against that? And regards to Councillor Carroll's point regarding the rats on the black bags, when there is an instance of that, do we do any education to the residents of not putting food waste into the black bags? Because if there's no food waste, no waste like that, the bags are less likely, the rats are less likely to come. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee, and thank you both.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. If I go through those in turn. So doorstep crime, yes, we do all we can to get the criminals into court. At the end of the day, the courts have sentencing guidelines, and sometimes we see sentences that we think are perhaps not as we would have liked them to have been, but there would be a good reason why that sentence has been passed within those sentencing guidelines, and it would be things like a discount or a reduction in a sentence as a result of an early guilty plea. Things like that, which have to be taken into account by magistrates court or a district judge. So those are outside of our control. And I would also say that it varies year to year. So I think last year when I reported, the actual sentences were much, much higher, but it will just be on a case by case basis. But yeah, we're absolutely out there banging the drum about the importance of this work.
Thank you very much. And please don't see that as a criticism. It was just, I didn't know if we could feed back into the system to say that it should be a bit more. Thank you.
Yeah, and The legislation that we're dealing with doorstep crime, very often it'll be the Fraud Act, which attracts a higher sentence than perhaps something that could be seen as a bit more of a technical regulatory piece of legislation. So Fraud Act it is the potential for quite severe sentences, but sometimes, as I say, in the court process, by factoring in the sentencing guidelines, that is the outcome.
Thank you.
Moving on to the vapes, and I think in effect what can be done with this sort of child appealing kind of marketing of it, and I did allude to display, the banning of display of tobacco, which, can you believe, was in 2012 in Wales. We just accept now that you don't see tobacco, and I think the discussion that's ongoing now at the highest levels, real concern about this explosion in vaping, particularly with youngsters. So I think that there's a journey, and a lot of agencies are pushing for this and talking about it, and we're very much part of that discussion. So I would hope that we'll start to see changes in that trade sector before too long.
That's good. Thank you.
Touch wood, yes. And then your last point about food waste going into black bags, I'd have to defer there and say that would be waste colleagues that would probably do that advice. I believe that they will sort of do education for people who perhaps are not recycling as they should be. Clearly, if there was a rodent issue and we became involved, then we could assist with that. But I think that infrastructure is already there with the waste management side of things.
That one was aimed for Mike rather than yourself. I do apologise.
Yeah, waste management will, if for example, there are multiple bags being dumped in the street or something, they will have somebody go through those bags, look for any evidence, and they will educate those people as well. That's just part of what they do. There are various things they do, but I've had to have it done in my ward on some issues. But I will quickly bring Mike in on that because he'll give some more information.
Yeah, it's just to reflect that every resident is going to be written to by the council in relation to the changes, and there will be information in there in response to that, and advice and guidance for residents. I was just going to comment as a resident of the Vale and Barry, and obviously moving from a 2-bag, a 1 bag a week every 2 weeks collection to the 3 weekly. I think that would have been an issue with rats when we were effectively looking at 2-bag collection, because people would have been putting food potentially in their bags regardless. I think the issue is around storage, and I do reflect on the fact that at the moment, in terms of flats, there are probably concerns and issues around vermin, specifically around flats and the way that we manage individuals, whether they be private organisations or council organisations or other landlords, about how that's managed. And I think that needs a little bit more work, because clearly the issue there is around recycling rates are really low with flatted accommodation. There aren't the storage areas, therefore people tend to place everything in the 1 bag. So as I say, that I reflect on the earlier question and answer to the question I gave. There's a lot more work needs to be done around flats and about what process might work, and it may be different to houses. But as I say, it was just really a reflection as a resident, looking back quite a few years ago when we introduced the 1 a week every 2 weeks, that I guess the same arguments were raised at that stage around vermin. But as you quite rightly say, Councillor Buckley, the important thing is put your food waste in your food caddy.
If I could come back, Chair.
Be quick, because we do have 3 more people wanting to speak, and we spent a while on this item. Thank you.
Sorry, I was only going to say I am aware there's non-food waste which can attract vermin as well. but it was more about educating people rather than treating it as belligerence and penalise them. Thank you very much for your responses, and thank you, Chair, for letting me speak.
Not a problem at all. As I've just said, we do have 3 more people waiting to speak. I will allow them to speak. However, I'd like to draw a line under this item then, as we have spent quite a while on it. And I know some of you are dying to get out and see the last of the sunshine while you can. Okay, so I will bring Councillor Avia in now, but I will ask that each of these next speakers please be as concise as they can. Thank you.
Yeah, Helen, we've had quite a few people begging on the streets now over the years in Barry, and they get picked up. Most of them get picked up in a car. They're not homeless, and there's a hell of a lot in Cardiff as well. Would that be a SRS to find out if they've been forced to do it, or would that be a police matter?
Yeah, that would be a police matter, I believe. If they were selling something, then it might be the fact that they would need some sort of street trading license or a permit, a vendor's permit, street vendor's permit. But just if people are begging, that wouldn't fall within the SRS remit.
Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, I was going to move to making a recommendation, but if I can see if there's one other speaker, if Councillor Goodjohn wants to come in, I'm happy to wait.
Now, our committee happy for me to bring Councillor Goodjohn in?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you, committee, for letting me speak, as I'm not a member of this committee. I have 3 quick questions on the report, Helen. First off, you mentioned a new income stream that you've identified this year that helps with the savings for this year. Could you enlighten us to what that is? Because I couldn't quite find it in the report. Apologies if it is in there. Second off, I wanted to ask about the Homes for Ukraine scheme and their inspections. You state that over 500 have been made. That seems like a low figure considering the number of Homes for Ukraine schemes that have been in Cardiff, Bridgend and the Vale of Glamorgan. So anything you could help with on that, such as how many there have been in the Vale specifically, would be helpful. Finally, I would like to ask how long does it take for a resident, if they call your hotline, on average, for them to reach the relevant officer to deal with their inquiry? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Goodjohn. Okay, so starting with the first of your 3 questions, the new income stream. We've got a couple of strands that we're developing this year, but it is very much doing more of the same. So we are we've got a number of primary authority partnerships. We've changed the way that we're working with one of those partners, and that is changing our income as a result of that. We've also got, I mentioned earlier, training that we're getting back into doing much more of the business training that we'd always done, but of course that had to be put in the back burner with COVID. And particularly of interest there, I mentioned the special procedures training. So for people who want to be licensed as tattooists, as body piercers, etc., they have to get what's called a level 2 qualification in infection prevention and control. We have become, and we did this some time ago, anticipating this, we've become one of only a few accredited training providers for that qualification in Wales. So again, we've got a lot of interest in that training course. So those are really our new income streams for the year. Going into next year, then we will need to find different ways of generating income. As I say, we're doing more of the same this year, but we're looking really putting some work into finding innovative new ways to generate some income for the coming years. So I hope that's answered that question for you. Going on to the second one, Homes for Ukraine work is very much a joint effort of SRS officers working with other partners and officers from the different councils to get the job done with Homes for Ukraine. So clearly we've had an involvement in around 500 across the board. I haven't got in front of me the Vale figures, but again, I can get those to you subsequently if that would help. And then your last question, you spoke about a hotline. Did you mean the hotline that I mentioned in relation to doorstep crime?
Yes.
Yes. So thankfully, it doesn't happen too often, but there will be a warm transfer straight to one of our safeguarding or major investigations officers. So it should work that in those circumstances, an individual will get to have a response to an officer pretty much immediately. The difficulty can be getting through to that point, as you know, with quite a lot of traffic on the through the contact centre. But once it's got to that point, we've got a number of options in our call routing system, so that a doorstep crime incident in progress is absolutely the number one option in that routing process.
May I, Chair, just make one final question regarding the budget? Sorry, you're on mute. I'm assuming.
Yeah, so I didn't realise I was still muted. Yes, as long as you're quick, you can. Just
Can I
be
ask
concise.
how much there has been saved based on the ending of vacant posts? Or if you don't have that information, can you send it to me?
Yes. For this current financial year, we had to make a 3% saving from our core budget, so not the authority specific budget, but the core budget, and that was around about £170,000 from memory, but I will check my figures. And of that, just over £100,000 was from the deletion of vacant posts. So 3 vacant posts were lost.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards.
Thanks, Chair. I take it I'm not muted now. I'm all right.
No, you're not
Okay.
muted now.
Okay, all right. So the recommendation I wanted to make is something that as you're aware, that I referenced last month's meeting, and I'm quite passionate about. And taking into consideration what we now know is that Welsh Government have launched a green paper in relation to sort of social housing and social landlords in particular, and our sort of work across the private rental sector. As the consultation period will come to an end, surprisingly on my birthday on the 15th of September, just putting it out there, would it not be sort of possible for me to do undertake some sort of scoping exercise, so that when we come to autumn, the council will have officers would have made their sort of given their feedback, given their formal responses, and as we're fast approaching recess, it would give us more time, I suppose, as a committee to look at a task and finish group that actually a project that will add value will consider the green paper, in particular the fact that in the Vale we've already discussed it, and Helen's referenced it quite sort of in depth in her report around our relationship with the private rental sector in the Vale will continue to grow. And obviously linked into all of that, again, we've all referenced is the cost of living crisis, which not only impacts on vulnerable renters, but increasingly those professionals, again, that Helen referenced, who, sort of maybe moving into rent, and looking at sort of how we can do a project that I suppose covers that without which is more defined and more focused, without going into too many tangents and cross-referencing too many other committees, that allows us to have a meaningful sort of discussion that can help officers in terms of, once this paper goes through, how it impacts on us in the Vale, and how we can utilise some of the recommendations from the government paper in terms of social housing, reducing homelessness, and protecting those more vulnerable who are renting at the moment and are unlikely to be renting for a generation to come.
Okay. Mark, did you get that?
Right. Yeah, we can add that as recommendation as long as the committee is happy, Chair. But I would obviously say that, as you're aware, at the chairs and vice chairs group meeting, there are a number of task and finish
Yes.
items already in consideration. So this might not be actually looked at properly until those other ones are looked at first. But certainly, if we can put that as a recommendation as something that we will look at in the perhaps slightly longer term, if the committee are happy to do that, and you know, in the meantime, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards can look at it in terms of a scoping thing, and maybe have a discussion, and we can get something out to the committee after the recess in terms of like
Mark,
a report.
I am happy to second the recommendation. Okay. I just want to check that the rest of the committee are happy with that. If you are not, please make yourself known. I don't see any dissent. I'm quite happy for that recommendation to go ahead. Okay.
The other
Yes.
one, obviously, Chair, we've a number of comments have been made that might be useful to go back to Helen's team as part of the consultation.
Also going to ask that.
So I can put that as a recommendation. Well, put that down in terms of recommendation that the comments be sort of brought back to SRS as part of their consultation. Helen, if you're happy to include that possibly in your report that goes off, in the final draft.
I believe Councillor Lloyd Selby requested something get sent back to Cabinet regarding the reshuffling of priorities. Am I right in that?
Or
did I misunderstand what you were saying there, Councillor?
Yes, so I'm not sure it needs to go back to Cabinet. I think it's probably for Helen and the team to consider as part of the report. Just
that's
that
what I was thinking would be more appropriate.
Impact of cost of living results in the need for reprioritisation, that the report just specifies what the process will be for sign-off.
Okay, thank you, Councillor, for clarifying. There's been an awful lot of discussion tonight. I wasn't entirely sure what the point, what the entire phrasing was.
Yeah, and I think, Chair, there was some wording as well, I believe, from the Vice Chair, but it might be other members, including Councillor Lloyd Selby as well, about possibly something in the report about greater sort of interaction or engagement with elected members around some of the messaging, you know, such as around doorstep crime and obviously the illegal
so that we can
money
pass
lending.
the information on, wasn't it? Yeah.
I don't know if that's something you could put in the report as well, Helen, as you know, as part of the consultation exercise as well from the committee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
As long as members are all happy with those comments to be included as well, and if there are any others.
That's what I was just going to check. I don't see anybody else's hand going up, and I don't see anybody disagreeing. So I'm assuming committee are happy.
Yes,
Chair.
Good. Okay. I don't think there is anything else tonight, is there?
No, Chair. There's those two items, and also
date of next meeting.
Any items that you've decided as urgent for parts 1 and 2, Chair?
Which I have none.
No. And yeah,
when was the date of next meeting? Is it the 12th of July?
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. So it'll be Wednesday, the 12th of July at 6 p.m.
I just had to double check the calendar there. So yes, date of next meeting is the 12th of July at 6 p.m. Thank you all for attending tonight. Thank you for your presentation, Helen. I've just realised that I forgot to thank Tom for his, so I will have to pass on my thanks to him. But thank you for your time tonight. Go and enjoy the rest of this evening. Mark, did you want me to stick around at all?
Yeah, I'll have a quick chat, Chair, before we go. That's fine.
Okay, no worries. So thank you for your time, guys. You may now go and enjoy your evening. Chill out.
Thanks, Chair.
Have fun.
Thank you,
Good
Chair.
night.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair. Good night all.